Bonjour tout le monde. Le sommet de l'OTAN se termine aujourd'hui ici à Washington. Avec nos alliés, on a passé les derniers jours à travailler ensemble. On a fait beaucoup de progrès. Je veux évidemment remercier le président Biden pour son leadership et les Américains pour leur accueil. Dans un monde incertain, c'est important de se rassembler comme ça pour renforcer nos relations. On top of numerous meetings with NATO allies this week, I had the opportunity to meet with many politicians and business leaders here in D.C., including members of Congress, senators, and governors. In a moment of deep global uncertainty, Canada and the U.S. know that they can count on each other, and that's really important. Our partnership is forged by shared geography and values, common interests, connections between our people, and of course, incredibly strong economic ties. Canada and the U.S. share one of the largest trading relationships in the world, which supports millions of good jobs on both sides of the border. We will keep working to strengthen and deepen this relationship. As an example, our two countries reached a key milestone this week with the negotiations on the Columbia River Treaty. We've reached an agreement on the terms of a new, modernized treaty with the support of Indigenous nations and British Columbia. This will protect communities from flooding, advance clean energy goals, and promote Indigenous priorities. As you've all seen, it's been a productive NATO summit this week. We discussed ways to bolster collective defense and deterrence capabilities, the importance of countering misinformation and disinformation, ongoing and evolving threats to global peace, prosperity, and the rules-based order. We, of course, discuss ways to further support Ukraine. This afternoon, President Zelensky will join us at a meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. As I discussed with him when we sat down yesterday, Canada will be providing further support so that Ukraine can continue to defend its freedom and ours. This includes an additional $500 million in military support as part of NATO's long-term pledge for Ukraine, supporting the launch of NATO security assistance and training for Ukraine, and up to $389 million to enhance F-16 pilot training, something Canada will be leading on in the coming year. The message is clear. We're here to support Ukraine to victory and beyond. Cette année, l'OTAN a 75 ans. Le Canada a contribué à la fondation de cette alliance qui compte maintenant 32 pays. Notre soutien est sans équivoque. Face à un monde de plus en plus instable et dangereux, le Canada est déterminé à en faire encore plus pour défendre les Canadiens, défendre nos valeurs et défendre nos alliés. Before our government took office, Canada was spending less than 1% of our GDP on defense. But we vowed to rapidly change that, and we followed through on our word. Canada is now in the top 5 NATO allies when it comes to absolute spending on defense, increased since 2015. In 2017, we released a $49 billion plan to ensure long-term predictable funding with, for example, investments in new warships, aircraft, and armored vehicles. In 2022, we went even further by announcing an investment of $38 billion in Canada's NORAD modernization plan, and we just recently released Our North Strong and Free, a defense policy update which invests $73 billion in defense over the next 2 decades. All that means that in Canada, since 2015, we've added $175 billion in defense spending. Our North Strong and Free also identifies areas of future investments in capabilities to respond to today's threats and challenges. As part of this work, Canada is taking the first step towards the procurement of up to 12 conventionally powered submarines. A larger, modernized submarine fleet will help us detect and deter threats on all 3 coasts and protect Canadians and Canadian interests. As we continue such investments, Canada fully expects to reach NATO's 2% of GDP spending target by 2032. We have built in a regular cycle of review in Canada's defence, including a new defence policy update in 2028. Through that process, we will continue to explore opportunities that will further increase defence spending and advance Canada's strategic interests. Le Canada s'attend à atteindre l'objectif de dépenses de 2% du PIB fixé par l'OTAN d'ici 2032. On s'est engagé à examiner la défense du Canada régulièrement, notamment avec une nouvelle mise à jour prévue en 2028. On va continuer à étudier les possibilités d'augmenter encore les dépenses consacrées à la défense et de favoriser les intérêts stratégiques du Canada. This week, we also landed a new historical agreement between Canada, the United States, and Finland to form an enhanced partnership called the ICE Pact. This new arrangement builds on the world-class expertise of our three countries to further strengthen our abilities to produce polar-capable vessels to meet the emerging needs for icebreakers in the decades ahead. This is a strategic imperative for us and for our allies. L'OTAN est plus unie que jamais. Le Canada est une voix forte au sein de l'Alliance pour la paix, pour la défense de nos valeurs, pour lutter contre la désinformation, pour soutenir l'Ukraine et pour s'attaquer aux menaces liées à l'environnement avec notre nouveau Centre d'excellence pour le changement climatique et la sécurité à Montréal. Again, I want to thank the United States for hosting the summit here in Washington. I want to thank my friend, the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, for his steadfast and outstanding leadership and collaboration over the past 10 years. I look forward to working with my successor, another friend, Mark Rutte, to further strengthen the alliance. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui. Je suis maintenant très heureux de prendre vos questions.
We'll now start with the question and answer period. Nous allons maintenant commencer avec la période des questions. First question goes to Mercedes Stephenson, Global News.
Hi, Prime Minister. Thanks for taking our questions. You've announced that you're going to get to 2%, which has been a long anticipated thing that your allies have been looking for, and you say it's by 2032. But your government hasn't attached money in terms of commitments, weapon systems, explaining how we're going to get there. So I'm wondering how credible you think allies or Canadians will find this plan when you're releasing something so major as sort of a sub-point in a press conference.
On the contrary, we have steadily increased over the past years our investments in defense. $175 billion in new defense spending announced over the past 8 years, with significant material and equipment purchases. We have demonstrated, including most recently with our North Strong and Free Defense Policy Update, a credible, concrete plan that gets us to 1.74% by 2030. Now, that's starting from a place where the previous government had us below 1% of GDP on defense spending. So we have had to steadily and massively invest in increasing our capabilities in Canada over the past number of years, because it's not just something the Canadians expect or our allies expect, it's something that the world requires. The world is a more dangerous, unstable place with shifting geopolitical realities, more conflicts and wars springing up in places we wouldn't expect. There is a need, particularly with our responsibility over the Arctic, to be stepping up, and that's what we have done. And because we have a concrete plan that gets us to 174, with included in it plans on submarines that we hadn't yet officialized, with plans on other capabilities that we're developing, plans to increase enrollment and enlistment as well. These are things that means we can say with confidence and assurance that we will hit the 2% spending mark by 2032.
Next question.
Murray Brewster with CBC News. Prime Minister, thank you for taking the question. The timeline could have very well have been just a line in your defense policy last spring. Why wasn't it announced until this point? And you could have saved yourself a whole world of grief by doing so. So why wasn't it announced? But also at the same time, how much confidence can we place in this timeline when you see the economic indicators that underpin this calculation showing Canada actually moving backward away from the target you set in the defense policy. So how much can we actually place stock in what we see here today?
I think one of the things that we have demonstrated is consistent investments in defense, in understanding that the world has changed, and where the previous government had defense spending hit record lows, below 1%, despite a commitment to move towards 2%, we had a lot of catching up to do, and that had big purchases involved. When Canada talks about reaching 10%, that's as one of the largest defense budgets in NATO. We are buying big things, we are building big things, and we are protecting the longest coastline in the world, including with increased responsibilities for the Arctic. We laid out a defense policy update that wasn't focused on answering media questions or focused on political advantage. It was about doing what is right and what is needed in a responsible way. That's why I'm happy to turn to Bill Blair to further talk about the DPU and the 2% pledge. Bill.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The defense policy that we released in April, I think, provided Canadians and our allies with a very clear roadmap and a path forward for Canadian investments in defense. But we also were very clear that in that document and the budget that was then subsequently released a few weeks later, we fully costed certain initiatives within that budget. But we acknowledged in our policy document that we needed to do many other things, and they are big things. And just for example, spending Canadian tax dollars well requires long-term planning and investment in capability in Canada. Our shipbuilding strategy, for example, to replace our Halifax fleet, is going to eventually deliver for the Royal Canadian Navy 15 new surface combatant ships, but the first one will not be delivered and available to them for deployment until 2032. It's a very, very significant investment in shipbuilding in Canada. It's going to create 10,800 sustainable jobs over 25 years. It's going to add $40 billion to our GDP, and it's going to deliver for the Royal Canadian Navy an extraordinary capability. We were able this week, and over the past several weeks, to assure our allies of the path forward for Canada and to show them that we had a credible, verifiable path to 2%, that we were making significant new investments in defense policy, and it's also enabled us to enter into, I think, an important and growing relationship with our NATO allies. I have signed an agreement earlier this week with Germany and with Norway in order to be more collaborative together in military national industrial policy and working together. There are a number of important conversations that our recent announcement with respect to the procurement of submarines have initiated among our allies. We think that there are real opportunities, and I am able to assure our allies we're serious about investing in Canada's national defense. We're doing it the right way so that there is a benefit not only to our military capability and our NATO allies, but also to the Canadian economy, Canadian workers, and Canadian industry. And that work has been moving forward with the introduction of our new defense policy. I think it gives us an opportunity to be able to demonstrate to our own country and hopefully to all of you that we are serious about investing in defense and we are doing the work that is necessary to do it right.
Question, question?
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Au mois d'avril, vous avez annoncé que le Canada allait dépenser l'équivalent d'1,76 du PIB en défense à la fin de la décennie 2029-30. Aujourd'hui, à peine 3 mois plus tard, vous arrivez avec 2 en 2032. Qu'est-ce que vous dites aux gens qui risquent de dire aujourd'hui, ça sent l'improvisation, ça sent la panique, que vous cédez parce que vous avez été vertement critiqué ces derniers jours?
Au contraire, on est en train d'investir en dépenses et on l'a fait depuis 9 ans maintenant parce que le monde est en train de changer, parce que la réalité géopolitique et la paix qu'on a connue depuis la fin de la guerre froide ne tient plus. On a besoin de s'assurer qu'on peut protéger notre Arctique, nos alliés, nos valeurs, nos démocraties contre de nouvelles menaces, avec la Russie et d'autres qui sont en train d'augmenter leurs capacités militaires et leurs ambitions à travers le monde. Ce n'est pas la situation dans laquelle on voudrait se trouver, mais c'est la situation dans laquelle on se trouve. Et on l'avait vu d'ailleurs à partir de 2017 avec nos investissements déjà dans l'avenir pour augmenter les dépenses en forces armées de 70%. Le gouvernement conservateur de M. Harper nous avait laissé en dessous de 1% du PIB en termes de dépenses militaires, malgré un engagement qu'il avait pris pour aller vers le 2%. Mais nous, on a fait ce travail. On a fait ce travail pour investir de façon responsable, pour augmenter de façon progressive, mais inévitable, nos investissements dans la défense. Et avec notre dernière annonce cet été, ce printemps, juste avant le budget, qu'on allait atteindre le 1,76% de notre PIB en 2030, on voit que c'est une ligne directe vers ce 2% en 2032. Particulièrement parce qu'à l'intérieur de notre annonce, notre mise à jour sur la défense du printemps, on avait prévu aussi que, oui, on va probablement devoir acheter des sous-marins. On va devoir investir dans des hélicoptères, dans d'autres enjeux qui s'en viennent dans un futur approché, mais on ne l'avait pas comptabilisé encore à ce moment-là parce qu'on n'avait pas pris les décisions finales. Mais maintenant, on les a pris, ces décisions sur les sous-marins. On voit les investissements qui vont venir. On voit les besoins à travers le monde pour défendre notre démocratie. Et on peut dire avec assurance que non seulement on va atteindre le 2% d'ici 2032, mais c'est la bonne chose à faire pour un gouvernement responsable, pour un Canada sécure et pour un avenir stable et prospère pour les Canadiens et tous nos alliés.
Next question.
Glenn McGregor, City News. Prime Minister, you say you have a plan to spend this money, but do you also have a plan to pay for it? Because the estimates are this is going to cost $15, $20 billion annually in perpetuity. How do you do that in the fiscal framework? Do you cut other programs? Do you go deeper into deficit?
We have demonstrated over the past number of years that we can and have been investing in our national defense, $175 billion of projected new investments in national defense, and now and into the future, in a responsible way, and at a time where we're also stepping up with the most ambitious housing plan Canada has ever seen. Investing in childcare, because we know that's not just a social program, that's also an economic program. Creating economic growth, creating record high employment. Investing in the green jobs of the future. These are things we're doing even as we invest record levels in our military and continue to. The situation, the global context requires us to be stepping up on defense. But I will remind people that stepping up on defense investments doesn't just involve spending money outside of this country. It means investing in capacity building, in good jobs, in innovation, in factories and development of economic growth in Canada while we invest in ourselves and our ability not just to defend ourselves and our north, but our allies at a time where everyone is interconnected.
Question.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Pour votre annonce sur les brises-glaces, est-ce que ça voudrait dire des contrats pour la Davie? Et si oui, combien de brises-glaces seraient construits là? Combien d'emplois?
Il y a encore beaucoup de négociations à faire, mais on peut arriver à cette annonce sur les brises-glaces parce que la Davie, non seulement on a investi pour la mettre sur pied et pour l'inclure dans notre stratégie de chantier naval au Canada, mais parce que la Davie a fait un achat d'un chantier naval, effectivement, d'un chantier naval en Finlande, qui était anciennement propriétaire, détenu par les Russes, qui maintenant va faire partie du travail que nous allons faire au Canada et à travers le monde pour répondre aux besoins de lutter contre les agressions russes. Donc, c'est un partenariat entre la Finlande et le Canada et les États-Unis pour construire ensemble plus de brise-glace. Oui, la Davie va sûrement en faire partie, mais il y a encore des négociations et des opportunités pour les autres chantiers navals à travers le pays de participer également.
Next question.
Judy Trin with CTV News. Mr. Prime Minister, Joe Biden has been facing intense pressure at home from within his own party to step down because of concerns over his mental acuity at the age of 81 years old. During this NATO summit, Mr. Prime Minister, what is your assessment of President Biden's performance and if he can lead on the global stage? And if you could also take that question and answer in French as well.
We are lucky on the world stage to have Joe Biden leading here at NATO, on the G7, in some extraordinarily consequential times. His depth of experience, his thoughtfulness, his steadfastness on the greatest issues and challenges of our time is a credit to the work that we're all doing together, and it has been, as always, a privilege and pleasure to work alongside him on big issues, and I look forward to continuing to. Le leadership de Joe Biden sur les enjeux d'importance mondiale dans ces moments de grandes conséquences pour la planète, que ce soit au niveau des changements climatiques, que ce soit au niveau de la sécurité géopolitique, que ce soit au niveau de la croissance économique, est extrêmement importante. C'est un leader avec énormément d'expérience, mais aussi avec une profondeur et une sagesse extrêmement importante, et j'ai bien hâte de continuer de travailler avec lui.
Next question.
Laura Dillon Kane, Bloomberg News. Thank you for taking our questions. You've been asked about 2% many times already, but I want to ask very frankly, how can Canadians be sure that you're serious about defense? Your government's been in power for nearly 9 years. Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago. We are neighbors with Russia in the Arctic. Your own defense minister wants a credible, verifiable plan. And yet this week, as of yesterday, your government was still discussing how to reach that goal. And today you come out with a timeline with no details of how to get there. So why should we believe you are serious and this is a priority for your government?
Canada is in the top 5 countries of NATO in terms of absolute increases in spending of NATO on military expenditures over the past 8 years. We have stepped up massively. After years of underinvestment by the previous Conservative government, we have stepped up in investing and in planning for the future in a deeply changing world. We went from below 1% of GDP on defense spending under the Conservatives to now projecting 1.76% of GDP just in the coming years. And that extends clearly and naturally to 2% with the investments that we're announcing that are coming up, whether it's on 12 new submarines, up to 12 new submarines, whether it's on helicopters, whether it's on increased enrollment, whether it's on long-range missile, whether it's on any of the other things that we know Canada is going to need to continue to step up. Canada is the 7th largest defense expenditures in NATO. We are a big country with big responsibilities and big needs. That's why, whether we're talking about 15 new surface combatant frigates, whether we're talking about 88 fighter jets, whether we're talking about $38 billion for upgrading NORAD, whether we're talking about a total of $175 billion that we've announced over the past years for the coming years in defense spending, we have shown that a responsible government steps up in a changing world and does the necessary work, not just to increase defense spending, but to do it in the right way that gives both benefits and jobs to Canadians, but mostly that develops the capabilities that we, and quite frankly our allies, are going to be relying on in an increasingly dangerous and uncertain world.
Next question.
Adrian Morrow with the Globe and Mail. Prime Minister, did you and your staff discuss the possibility of replacing Chrystia Freeland as Finance Minister with Mark Carney? And did you raise this issue with Mr. Carney personally? En français aussi.
I have been talking with Mark Carney for years now about getting him to join federal politics. I think he would be an outstanding addition at a time when Canadians need good people to step up in politics. In regards to Chrystia, she has been a close friend, an ally, and partner in doing really big things for Canada and will continue to be. Delivering the largest housing and most ambitious housing program in Canada's history, delivering on childcare, transforming our economy to be ready for the 21st century. These are all things that Chrystia has led on and will continue to. I have full confidence in her abilities and on the work we're going to be doing together.
En français aussi.
Bien sûr. Ça fait des années que je parle avec Mark Carney sur son implication en politique. Ça prend de bonnes personnes pour s'impliquer en politique et je suis toujours ouvert à ce que d'autres personnes se joignent à nous. Par rapport à Chrystia, c'est une amie, c'est une collègue qui a livré au fur des dernières années, à fur et à mesure que les années ont passé, des initiatives qui ont aidé énormément de Canadiens, que ce soit le programme le plus ambitieux du logement que le Canada ait jamais vu, que ce soit au niveau des garderies à 10 $ à l'échelle du pays, que ce soit au niveau de la croissance économique durable pour passer à travers d'une pandémie et créer les emplois qu'on est en train de voir. Elle continue d'être un membre essentiel de mon équipe et j'ai pleine confiance en elle. J'ai pleine confiance en elle.
Next question.
This is for either the Prime Minister or Minister Blair. And correct me if my understanding is wrong here, but are there not some low-hanging fruit still that could be picked to reach that 2%? I mean, my understanding is that the U.S. Coast Guard is under the Defense Department, its ships are armed, it's able to book all of those expenses with NATO. Canada's Coast Guard is under Fisheries and Oceans, the ships aren't armed, and it's only able to book some of its Coast Guard expenditures. Wouldn't it be simple just to put a $50,000 gun turret on a $20 million ship and book it? And why has that not been done? And as a corollary to that, also with these icebreakers, will we be able to claim the money that we spend on those as part of our 2%? And if it requires arming those ships to get that, would you be willing to commit to do that?
Thanks for the question, Evan, because you actually sort of underline one of the challenges that Canada has always had with the idea of 2% as the metric by which we judge whether or not a country is living up and contributing to NATO. Canada, over the past decades, has been there to lead in NATO on all of the various initiatives that have put forward. We continually step up and punch above our weight, something that isn't always reflected in the crass mathematical calculation that certain people turn to very quickly, which is why we've always questioned the 2% as the be-all and end-all of evaluating contributions to NATO. So yes, there may be ways where we could shift some accounting or make a little tweak here or give every Coast Guard member a handgun and say, okay, we've done our job. Would that make Canada safer? Would that make Canadians better off? Would that make us better able to counter the malign influence of Russia in democracies around the world, the partnerships with China, the activities of the DPRK in Iran? Our approach on defense is a profoundly serious one that looks at what capabilities we need, what is needed and what is good for Canadians, where we can best contribute to the world, and how to get there in a responsible way as a government. That has guided us. Not some nominal targets that make for easy headlines and accounting practices, but don't actually make us automatically safer. That's the work we've done. That's the work I've asked Bill to do, and that's exactly what he's done. Bill.
Yeah, if I may, Canada's made the greatest investment in the Royal Canadian Air Force since the Second World War. In the last 2 years, we've signed contracts for over 200 aircraft for the Royal Canadian Air Force and made a historic investment in the training of new pilots and maintenance crews. We're also making the most significant investment in the renewal of the Royal Canadian Navy in its history. 15 new surface combatant ships, 6 new Arctic offshore patrol vessels, new supply vessels, and as we announced just earlier this week, we're doing the work now necessary to identify exactly what our Royal Canadian Navy is going to need for underwater surveillance in a submarine fleet. We know that there's a great deal of work to do, but respectfully, I think Canada's obligations to our NATO partners and to our own citizens in the defense of our country requires more than a little bit of accounting variation. It really requires investment, real investment in capability for our Canadian Armed Forces. We have asked them to do an extraordinary job, and for over 150 years, they have been there for Canadians, but also for all of our allies around the world. We're going to make sure that they have that capability, and they also have the people that they're going to require to live up to our obligations and to defend our country and our continent. That requires investment, but we want to also reassure Canadians, we're not just spending money, we're investing money. And that's investing in capability for the Canadian Armed Forces, but it's also investing in Canada. It's investing in Canadian workers, Canadian industry, and the Canadian economy. And I think that work, if we show our work to Canadians and to our allies, I can tell you that in all my conversations with our allies over the course of this week, I think they have come to a very good understanding and a real appreciation for the hard work that Canada is doing to live up to our obligations. And as well, I think we've got more work to do to explain to Canadians why these investments remain a priority for our government and why there's real benefits to Canadians by making these investments and delivering not only on our commitment to our allies, but on our commitment to defend our country.
Last question.
Bien sûr. La question souligne un petit peu à quel point le chiffre quasiment arbitraire, pas vraiment arbitraire, mais lié à très peu de choses, le 2% peut représenter. Il y a des choses qu'on pourrait faire théoriquement pour qu'on comptabilise plus dans nos forces armées. Mais ce ne seraient pas nécessairement des choses qui nous aideraient à être en réalité plus sécuritaires, plus protégés, mieux capables de contrer les influences de la Russie et les attaques de la Russie. Ce que nous avons entrepris, c'est au lieu de dire comment est-ce qu'on va arriver aux 2%, on a dit qu'est-ce qu'on a besoin de faire pour créer des forces armées qui ont les capacités qui vont être nécessaires dans les années, dans les décennies à venir. Et c'est avec cette approche responsable que nous pouvons nous tenir ici aujourd'hui pour dire les investissements qu'on va faire, oui, ils vont atteindre le 2% d'ici 2032, mais surtout, ils vont faire du Canada un endroit plus sécure, ils vont faire des forces armées canadiennes un organisme encore plus capable à contrer les menaces qui existent malheureusement de plus en plus à travers le monde, et que nous allons être là pour nos partenaires et nos alliés, comme eux, ils vont être là pour nous.
Last question.
Alex Ballingal, the Toronto Star. You say that the 2% is a crass calculation, but we've heard your allies over and over again all week talk about how important it is for all members to hit 2% as a reflection of a fair burden share within the alliance. It's obviously been a political problem for you guys this week. Are you comfortable having that problem remain hanging over Canada for another 8 years when we have some of the allies saying this floor should be raised to 2.5%, 3%? Can we remain below the 2% for another 8 years?
It actually hasn't been a political problem this year, and this week. It has been a conversation that allies have been pleased to hear that we have a plan and a timeline to get to the 2%, but mostly they are interested and excited about the kinds of investments we're making. 88 new fighter jets to up to 12 new submarines, to moving forward on NORAD modernization, to continuing to step up in support of Ukraine. Canada is here. We have the seventh or eighth largest defense budget in NATO. We're one of the big countries in NATO that contributes significantly to everything people are doing. And when they hear us say, yes, we're going to be doing even more, we're going to be stepping up, we're getting the equipment that people are going to be relying on, we're getting the strength in our military that the world can count on, that is good news. It has been good news this week, and will continue to be good news as we make sure that Canada continues to step up in the world and punch way above its weight.
Thank you. This concludes today's press conference.
Can I just add something? I think that for a long time, Canada has been blessed by our geography, which is a difference with many other NATO countries. What is different now is that we can not only rely on that geography anymore, particularly in the Arctic. And what our allies are seeing now is that we are investing also in ourselves, in our defense, in our Arctic, because at the end of the day, Canada's in charge with Arctic countries, the defense of the northern frontier of NATO. And that's what our allies have seen this week as well.
Thank you.